I wasn't supposed to see flames like that again, but I did. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, because the night my sister's car exploded in our driveway, it felt like the past had come back to burn me alive. I'd sworn fire would never touch my family after losing so much already, but Linda Markham, our HOA president, made sure it did. She called it rules. She called it order. But I knew better. I could smell the accelerant clinging to the air, the same way I'd smelled it at crime scenes years ago. That fire wasn't an accident. It was a warning, and Patricia didn't know who she'd just targeted. My sister wasn't some nameless homeowner she could bully. She was the sheriff's daughter. And I wasn't just a brother standing on the sidelines. I was a trained fire investigator who knew exactly how to follow the trail Patricia thought she'd hidden. Where are you watching from? That night bled straight into the next confrontation, and Patricia wasted no time making her move. You can't leave that car sitting here another night, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to wake the whole street. Guest passes expire at midnight. You know the rules. I stood at the edge of my driveway, the air still thick with the faint smell of burned rubber. Ash from Elena's last car clung to the pavement, a blackened scar she had to walk past every morning. Patricia's pearl earrings glinted under the streetlight, as if even her jewelry wanted to announce her authority. You've already cost her one car, I said, my voice low and steady. You won't touch this one? Her lips curled. That fire was unfortunate. Teenagers, probably. But if your sister insists on ignoring regulations, the board will escalate enforcement. She stretched out the word board, as if the entire community stood behind her. I knew better. Half of them had grown too scared to speak against her. That didn't stop Patricia from parading around like she was untouchable. I glanced at Elena, who had stepped onto the porch, her arms folded tight against her chest. She tried to look calm, but her jaw betrayed her tension. Patricia wasn't just pushing at the edges of the rules. She was testing how much fear she could squeeze from every resident on this block. Behind her, Mara Jensen lingered near the mailbox, her arms stacked with HOA newsletters. She froze when my eyes met hers. The way she gripped those papers told me she wanted to vanish, but the flicker of unease on her face told me something else. She knew Patricia was going too far. Elena has every right to park here, I said, pulling the bylaws from my jacket pocket. I'd started carrying them like armor. Section 4, Article 2. Family guests can park for up to 7 days. Your fine is worthless. For the first time, Patricia's perfect smile cracked. It lasted just a second before she smoothed it over. Rules only matter as much as we enforce. Them, she replied coolly, and I enforce them. Her arrogance stirred the same heat in my chest I'd felt that night. The fire's glow dancing across Elena's face as she stood in her nightgown, trembling, while her car turned into a skeleton of twisted steel. I'd sworn to her that night, with sirens screaming in the distance, that I would find out who was responsible. You're not above the law, I told Patricia, holding her gaze. And you're not above the truth. The cul-de-sac went still. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath. Mara shifted, hugging the stack of newsletters closer, her eyes darting between us like she might finally speak. But Patricia broke the moment, heels clicking against the pavement as she turned away. Enjoy your evening, she tossed over her shoulder, her voice syrupy with false politeness. The board will decide tomorrow how to proceed. I watched her retreat into the shadows, my fists tight at my sides. The faint smell of gasoline still haunted me, sharper than any threat she could throw. She thought she was safe behind bylaws and bureaucracy. She didn't know she was standing in the path of someone trained to read the language of fire. Elena stepped closer, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Danny, what if she does it again?" I looked at the scar on the pavement, then at my father's restored Mustang gleaming under the porch light just a few feet away. That car was more than chrome and paint. It was his legacy, a promise of resilience that Patricia would never understand. She won't, I said quietly, placing a hand on Elena's shoulder. Because this time, I'll be ready. Where are you watching from? The next day I saw how wide Linda's net really spread. I walked down to the community pool that afternoon, partly to clear my head and partly to gauge what the neighbors were whispering about. The Florida sun bounced off the water, kids' laughter cutting through the sticky air. On the surface, it looked like any normal weekend, but I didn't miss the tension beneath it. "Another notice this morning," Mr. Alvarez muttered to his wife as they adjusted their chairs. His voice carried farther than he realized. "This time, about the color of our shutters. Said they're faded and not up to standard. They were painted last year." Two women nearby traded uneasy glances. One of them leaned close, lowering her voice just enough that I had to edge closer to catch it. She told me if I didn't trim the hedges to regulation height, they'd fine me $200 a week, and when I pushed back, she hinted my pool pass might get revoked. It was all the same playbook: fines, threats, intimidation dressed up as procedure, and no one dared stand against her. I sat at the edge of the pool, letting the cold tile seep into my palms. Elena stretched out beside me, trying to relax, but I could see the way her eyes flicked toward the parking lot every few minutes. The empty space where her car had burned left a scar deeper than pavement. Linda's shadow stretched farther than my driveway. She'd made fear a part of daily life here. People whispered instead of speaking, obeyed instead of questioning. I'd seen this pattern before, though in a different kind of fire. When landlords used code violations to squeeze tenants, when arson cases were buried to protect property values. Always the same story: power feeding on silence. "Danny," Elena said softly, "maybe we should just follow the rules. Stay out of her way." Her words cut deeper than she meant. That was exactly what Linda wanted: to wear people down until surrender felt like safety. I shook my head. That's how she wins. Every time someone backs off, she gets bolder. She burned your car and called it bad luck. What happens when she decides the Mustang doesn't fit her idea of this neighborhood? Or when another family doesn't bow down fast enough? Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The Mustang gleamed in both our minds like a warning and a promise. A splash broke the moment as kids cannonballed into the shallow end, their shrieks cutting through the thick air. Parents smiled faintly, but I noticed how many of them cast wary glances toward the clubhouse. Even here, at the pool, under the sun, Linda's presence lingered like smoke. That's when I caught sight of Mara. She stood near the lifeguard station, handing out HOA newsletters with the same mechanical efficiency I'd seen last night. She avoided my eyes, but her shoulders were tense, her movements sharper than usual. Every time someone muttered under their breath about the fines or the threats, Mara flinched. She wasn't just a cog in Linda's machine. She was a woman trapped inside it. That flicker of hesitation told me she wasn't comfortable carrying Linda's fire for her. But fear is a powerful leash. I leaned back, letting the sunlight sting my eyes. Linda believed the community was hers to control, and most people seemed too beaten down to challenge her. But I wasn't most people. I'd spent my career tracing destruction back to its source, proving what others thought couldn't be proven. And this time, the fire hadn't just burned a car, it had burned a line straight to Linda's doorstep. I would follow it. Elena broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think anyone else will stand up to her?" I glanced at Mara, at the neighbors muttering by the poolside, at the faint ripple of resentment that still stirred beneath the fear. "Not yet," I said, "but they will." And I meant it, not because they trusted me, but because when fire gets out of control, it consumes everything in its path. Linda had started a blaze she couldn't contain, and sooner or later, the whole community would see it. The following morning, I walked into the HOA office knowing Linda wouldn't waste a second tightening her grip. The place looked like a bank more than a community office. White walls, polished floors, the faint hum of the air conditioner trying to erase the Florida heat outside. On the far wall hung a framed mission statement about upholding neighborhood standards. Underneath it sat Mara Jensen, shuffling papers like they were a shield. She glanced up when I stepped in, and for a split second, her mask slipped. Her eyes flicked with recognition, maybe even guilt, before she looked back down. The stack of violation notices in front of her told me everything. She was the hand that delivered Linda's punishment, but her hands trembled as she stapled them together. "Morning, Mr. Ruiz," she said, her voice softer than I expected. "How can I help you?" I set the latest fine on the counter between us. "You can start by explaining why my sister's guest parking pass suddenly doesn't count." Her lips pressed together. She didn't answer right away. Instead, She smoothed the corner of the paper with careful precision, as if stalling would make the question disappear. Finally, she whispered, "That's the board's decision." "The board," I repeated. "Or Linda." Her shoulders flinched at the name. She didn't deny it, but her silence said enough. Behind her, through the glass office window, I caught a glimpse of Linda in the conference room, laughing with 2 other board members. Her gestures were wide, animated, like a politician basking in her own applause. She didn't even glance in my direction. She didn't need to. She thought Mara was her mouthpiece, her safety net. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "You know what happened wasn't an accident. I can prove it. But if this office keeps covering for her, it won't just be Linda answering questions." Mara's stapler froze mid-click. Her eyes darted toward the conference room, then back to me. For a moment, I thought she might speak. Instead, she whispered, "You should be careful. Pushing her only makes it worse." There it was, fear wrapped inside warning. She wasn't defending Linda. She was trying to protect herself. "You think I don't know what worse looks like?" I said quietly. "I've seen worse. Fires don't scare me. Bullies don't scare me. Watching my sister suffer in her own home, that's what scares me. And I won't let it happen again." Mara's hands tightened around the stack of papers. She stared at the notices like they might bite her. I saw the conflict plain as day. Loyalty to her job pulling one way, her conscience pulling the other. Her silence wasn't indifference, it was survival. The conference room door opened, and Linda's heels clicked against the tile. She strode out, lips painted in the same sharp red as her blazer. "Mr. Ruiz," she said with exaggerated warmth. "So glad to see you taking advantage of our open-door policy." I turned slowly, meeting her smile with none of my own. "Just making sure the rules are applied fairly?" "Of course they are," Linda said smoothly. "We pride ourselves on consistency. Mara will be happy to explain the bylaws to you." Mara didn't look happy at all. She nodded weakly, her eyes fixed on the counter, her cheeks flushed. Linda's hand brushed the fine still sitting between us. "You'll want to settle this promptly," she added, her tone slipping back to steel. "The board has little patience for repeat offenders." I held her stare until she turned away, satisfied she'd made her point. The moment her heels faded down the hall, Mara finally exhaled. "You should leave," she whispered, barely audible. "She's watching everything." I picked up the fine, folding it neatly into my pocket. "Then she'll see I'm not backing down." As I stepped out into the thick afternoon heat, I knew 2 things for certain. Linda's confidence was built on fear, and Mara was standing on the fault line between truth and silence. The crack was already showing. All it needed was pressure. 2 days later, the escalation arrived in the form of a letter stamped "Final Notice," and a meeting that felt more like a trial. The HOA clubhouse smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. Rows of folding chairs lined the hall, most of them filled with residents pretending they weren't watching. At the front, the board sat like judges behind a long table, and at the center, flanked by her allies, sat Linda Markham in her crimson blazer, tapping a pen against her folder, as if she couldn't wait to pass sentence. "Mr. Ruiz," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room. "Your household has failed to comply with multiple parking regulations, and the board has voted unanimously to escalate enforcement. That includes suspension of community privileges and potential legal action." Her words rippled through the crowd. Parents shifted uncomfortably. Neighbors whispered behind hands. I could feel Elena tense beside me, her fingernails digging into her notebook. I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch. "My sister's car was burned to the ground in this neighborhood. And your response is to fine her for borrowing a curb?" Linda's smile was as sharp as glass. "The board is not responsible for criminal acts. We enforce standards. It's unfortunate, of course, but irrelevant to the matter at hand." The dismissal hit like a slap. Unfortunate. Irrelevant. She'd reduced Elena's terror to a footnote in her script. I scanned the room. Mara sat at the edge of the board table, her hands folded too tightly, knuckles pale. She avoided my eyes, but her discomfort was visible to everyone who cared to see. Every time Linda spoke, Mara flinched just slightly, like each word struck something inside her. You're twisting the bylaws, I said, pulling my copy from my jacket. The pages were worn now, creased from constant use. Guest passes extend to family. Section 4. Enough, Linda cut in, her pen snapping down against the folder. You don't dictate our interpretation. The board does. That was her play. Control the language, control the outcome. But I knew fire didn't lie. Neither did bylaws written in black ink. Elena has every right to be here, I pressed, and no amount of intimidation changes that. Linda's gaze hardened. Intimidation? She let out a laugh that sounded rehearsed. You've mistaken accountability for harassment. This community expects order, and I'll see that it's maintained. The audience shifted again, unease rippling like wind through dry grass. Some stared at their laps, unwilling to be caught watching. Others glanced at me with quiet sympathy, but no courage to speak. Fear had done its work here. Elena's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent anchor. She wanted me to stand firm, even if her voice couldn't rise above the weight pressing down on her. Linda straightened, clearly savoring the silence. Failure to comply will result in further penalties. We have full authority to enforce them. Her confidence was a fire of its own, hot, consuming, reckless. And like any fire, it left traces she couldn't hide. I'd seen them already. I leaned forward, my voice calm but cutting. Authority doesn't mean immunity. Every action leaves evidence, and some evidence can't be burned away. For the first time, Linda's smile faltered. Just briefly, but I caught it, and so did Mara. Her eyes flicked to mine, wide, almost pleading. She knew what I meant. She knew there was more under the surface than Linda wanted to admit. Linda banged the gavel the board used for order, though no one had spoken. This meeting is adjourned, she declared quickly, rising before anyone could question her. Her allies followed, papers rustling, chairs scraping. The performance was over, but her mask had cracked. As the crowd trickled out, neighbors avoided my eyes. Fear still ruled them. But Mara lingered, her lips pressed tight, her body caught between duty and conscience. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The conflict was written all over her face. And I knew then, the board wasn't united. The fire Linda had lit was starting to spread inside her own walls. The smell hit me before I even bent down. 2 days after the board meeting, I returned to the charred patch where Elena's car had burned. The county fire department had cleared the scene, chalking it up to possible electrical failure. But I'd spent too many years reading the stories flames left behind to accept that. Fires tell the truth if you know how to listen. I crouched low, my knees brushing the gritty pavement. The asphalt was scarred black, but not evenly. Burn patterns stretched outward in a V shape, pointing back toward the rear wheel well. Electrical fires start inside. This one started outside. I pulled a small evidence kit from my bag, something I hadn't used in years but kept close. A habit from my days as a fire marshal. With a cotton swab, I dabbed at the darkened streak near the curb. The faint, oily sheen rose immediately. Accelerant. Someone had poured fuel here. Danny! Elena's voice trembled behind me. She'd insisted on coming, even though the sight of the wreck still made her stomach knot. You really think someone... I looked back at her. I don't think... I know her eyes glistened, fear and anger warring across her face. She wrapped her arms around herself as if she could hold the memory back. The night she'd stood here in her nightgown, watching flames chew through metal, while neighbors peeked from their windows but didn't come close. I turned back to the ground. The burn trail extended farther than I expected, a faint residue leading across the curb and toward the property line. My pulse quickened. Whoever set the fire hadn't even tried to hide their tracks. Kneeling, I followed the faint line until it ended near the hedge that separated our house from Linda Markham's perfectly trimmed yard. The same hedges she'd bragged about at the last board meeting, holding them up as an example of community pride. I dug the swab deeper into the soil, sealing it in a vial. The smell of gasoline was unmistakable now, even faint days later. Linda had been so certain, so smug at the board meeting. But evidence doesn't lie. Elena, I said, rising slowly, this wasn't just about you parking in the wrong spot. She wanted to scare us, to make an example of us. Her face tightened. She's insane. Who burns a car to enforce a rule? Someone who thinks no one will ever prove it. I sealed the vial in my bag, my heart thudding steady and hard. This was the first crack in Linda's armor, but a single vial wouldn't be enough. I'd need more, patterns, corroboration, someone who'd seen what they weren't supposed to. Evidence alone wins cases, but witnesses, they close them. Elena's voice softened. What if she comes after the Mustang next? My father's car. The one he'd spent decades restoring. The one he'd driven me to my first firehouse in. Just the thought of its chrome body catching flames twisted my gut. She won't, I said firmly, because now I have proof. And once the right people see it, she won't be able to touch us again. I snapped photos of the burn trail, the soil, the angle of the scorch marks. Years of muscle memory guided me. The way light catches melted metal, the way shadows reveal depth in burned scars. Each click of the camera felt like another nail in Linda's coffin. A breeze rustled the hedges, carrying the faint scent of Linda's roses. I looked up at her house, curtains drawn, blinds angled just enough to watch without being seen. I had no doubt she was up there, waiting for me to walk away empty-handed. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed, not this time. I stood, dusted my hands off, and tucked the evidence kit under. My arm. The truth was here, written in soot and fuel. And if Linda thought fire could erase it, she'd underestimated the wrong man. By the time night fell, the house was silent except for the low hum of the ceiling fan. Elena had gone to bed hours earlier, though I doubted she'd slept. I sat in my home office, the glow of a desk lamp spilling across photographs, swabs, and my battered old field notebook. The Mustang's keys lay on the desk beside me, a reminder of what stood to be lost if I failed. I slid one of the photographs closer. The V pattern was sharp, unmistakable. Fire spreads outward in curves and shadows, but it always points back to where it began. The origin was clear, rear wheel well, fuel line untouched, no shorted wires, no accident. I uncapped the vial I'd sealed earlier. The faint chemical bite of gasoline stung my nose. Even after days in the sun, it lingered. That kind of residue doesn't happen by chance. Someone poured it. Someone meant for the flames to take everything. And the trail. I pressed my finger against the photo, tracing the faint path across the curb and into the hedge line, right where Linda's yard began. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. If I presented this in court, any rookie fire marshal would recognize it. Accelerant use, exterior origin, deliberate ignition. But here, in a neighborhood strangled by fear, evidence meant nothing without backing. Linda knew that. She counted on silence more than science. The desk fan ticked softly and I rubbed my temples. I'd been in this position before, standing in the aftermath of flames, holding answers that no one wanted to hear. But this time was different. This wasn't a warehouse fire or an abandoned lot. This was Elena's car. This was my father's driveway. I looked toward the window, where the Mustang sat in the moonlight, chrome gleaming like it carried its own fire inside. I thought of my father's hands polishing that hood, the way he said, "This car will outlast me, Danny. It'll remind you of where you come from." If Linda thought she could take that from me, she'd underestimated what memory can ignite. My phone buzzed on the desk, a message from an old colleague, Sam, a veteran in the county fire marshal's office. He'd texted back after I sent him the residue photo earlier. "That's not electrical. You've got accelerant, no doubt about it." I stared at the words until they blurred. Confirmation, professional, irrefutable. But it also made the danger real in a way that twisted in my gut. Linda hadn't just crossed a line, she'd set it ablaze. The office door creaked and Elena appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were tired, her voice quiet. "You're still working?" I nodded. "I have to." She stepped closer, gaze drifting to the photos. It was her, wasn't it? The weight in her tone cut deeper than any accusation. I closed the folder slowly. "I can't prove it in court yet, but every sign points to her." Elena hugged the blanket tighter. "What if she comes after the house next?" I followed her glance to the Mustang, visible through the blinds. My chest tightened. "Then I'll be ready." Her voice cracked. "Danny, you're not just fighting fines anymore. You're fighting her. I know." I pushed the folder aside, looking straight at her. And I've made up my mind. This isn't about tickets or curbside parking. She's trying to burn us out of our own lives. I won't let that happen. Elena's eyes shimmered, but she nodded. She didn't try to talk me down this time. She just placed her hand on my shoulder, steady, strong, then slipped quietly back to her room. I turned back to the evidence. The smell of gasoline lingered in the vial. The Mustang keys glinted under the lamp. And in that moment, the decision was final. Linda Markham had started this fire. I was going to finish it. I found Mara where no one else would think to look, in the small park tucked behind the tennis courts, half hidden by a row of oaks. Evening had settled in, the kind of humid Florida dusk where the air feels heavier than the sky. She sat on a bench, HOA newsletters stuffed in her tote, staring at the pond as if it held answers. She jumped when she saw me. "Daniel!" Her voice was a whisper, sharp with nerves. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I said, easing onto the bench a careful distance away. "But we both know why we are." Her eyes darted around, scanning the shadows. "Linda watches everything. If she sees us—" "She won't," I cut in. "Not here. Not now." Silence pressed between us, thick as the humidity. I let it stretch, waiting. Mara twisted the strap of her tote until her knuckles went white. Finally, she spoke. "I heard her," she said, her voice trembling. "The night before the fire. She was in the office with Mark, the maintenance guy. She told him the car needed to be gone, that it was hurting the look of the street. He asked if she wanted him to call a tow, and she said, no. Make sure it never comes back." The words hung in the air like sparks, fragile and dangerous. My chest tightened, not with surprise, but with the confirmation I'd been waiting for. "Did anyone else hear?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "No, just me. And if she finds out I told you—" "She won't," I said firmly. "Not if we're careful." Her eyes brimmed with fear. "Daniel, you don't understand. Linda keeps files on people, photos, complaints, leverage. If she thinks I'm disloyal, she'll ruin me. My husband's business depends on this neighborhood's contracts. We'd lose everything." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, keeping my voice low. "And what happens if you stay silent? How many more families lose cars? How many more kids wake up to fire outside their windows? You think she'll stop at me?" Mara's hands shook as she pressed them together. I could see the war inside her, the instinct to protect herself, colliding with the guilt of knowing too much. "I'm not asking you to stand at a podium," I said softly. "Just the truth. Nothing more." Her breath hitched, and for a moment I thought she'd bolt. Instead, she reached into her tote and pulled out a folded slip of paper. She held it out with trembling fingers. "I kept a copy of the maintenance log," she whispered. "Mark signed out equipment the night of the fire. The record's supposed to stay in the office, but I couldn't stop thinking about it." I took the paper carefully, like it was fragile glass. The log showed exactly what she said: Mark's initials, the time logged out, the fuel container listed in the notes. My pulse hammered. This wasn't just her word, it was corroboration. "Mara," I said, meeting her eyes, "this changes everything." She flinched, glancing toward the street. "Keep my name out of it. Please. I'll deny it if she asks." I folded the paper into my pocket, my voice steady. "You won't have to say a word. I'll handle the rest." For the first time that night, her shoulders eased, just slightly. But the fear never left her eyes. "She thinks she's untouchable," Mara said softly. "Don't underestimate her." "I don't," I replied. But she underestimated me. The chorus of cicadas rose as night deepened, filling the silence between us. Mara stood, clutching her tote tight against her chest, and hurried off without another word. I watched her go, the paper burning like fire against my side. Evidence, witness testimony, a crack in Linda's wall of control. The fire had spoken. Now, I was ready to make sure the whole neighborhood heard it. By the time I left the park, Mara's words echoed louder than the cicadas. Make sure it never comes back. It wasn't just hearsay anymore. Between the accelerant trail, the residue, and the maintenance log, Linda's fingerprints were all over the fire, even if she never struck the match herself. The next morning, I drove to the County Fire Safety Training Center, a squat concrete building on the edge of town, where I used to teach rookie investigators. The place still smelled of charred wood and chemical smoke, reminders of the controlled burns used for drills. Walking through the doors felt like stepping back into the life I'd tried to leave behind. Sam met me in the classroom, a stack of files in his arms. "You're stirring trouble, Ruiz," he said without preamble. "You really think the HOA president torched a car?" I set the maintenance log on the table, alongside the photos I'd taken and the vial of residue. "I don't think." "I know. I just need to make it undeniable." Sam flipped through the materials, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. "Patterns are clean. Accelerant trails obvious. Hell, this would pass review in a heartbeat. You planning to take it to the sheriff?" "Eventually," I said. "But first, I need to build it so solid no lawyer can punch holes in it." We spent hours reviewing every detail. I laid out burn patterns, cross-referenced the ignition point with Mara's statement, and even mapped the distance from the curb to Linda's hedge line. Sam pulled out sample charts from old cases, helping me calibrate the data. Every time we found a weak spot, we shored it up. Every time Linda's defense could argue coincidence, we added another layer of proof. By late afternoon, the whiteboard was covered in sketches, angles of flame spread, time estimates, chemical residue breakdowns. My handwriting looped and slanted across the board like the story of the fire itself. Sam capped his marker and stepped back. "You've got her boxed in. This isn't vandalism. It's arson with intent. And with that log, it's conspiracy." I nodded, though the weight in my chest didn't ease. She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. If she thinks she can burn her way to obedience, she's about to find out what evidence looks like when it fights back. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with everything spread before me: photos, logs, witness notes. Elena hovered nearby, restless, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Danny, you're building a case like you're back in the marshal's office," she said. "Do you really think this will stop her?" I looked up at her. "It won't just stop her. It'll end her hold on this community. People are afraid because they think she's untouchable. But when the sheriff sees this, when the neighbors see it, she won't be able to hide behind fines and bylaws." Elena leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "You sound so certain." "I have to be," I said. "Doubt is what lets bullies keep winning, and I'm done watching her win." I gathered the evidence into folders, labeling each piece with neat precision: burn patterns, residue analysis, maintenance log, witness statement. Each document felt like a brick, and together they built the wall that would close in around Linda. When I slid the final folder shut, the house felt different, lighter, like the fire that had tried to consume us had finally sparked something stronger in return. I stepped outside onto the porch. The Mustang gleamed under the porch light, chrome shining like a sentinel. I rested my hand on its hood, feeling the cool metal beneath my palm. "She won't take this from us," I whispered. "Not while I'm still standing." Behind me, Elena joined me on the porch. "Then what's next?" she asked quietly. I looked at the folders in my arms, then out at the dark street where Linda's house loomed behind drawn curtains. "Next," I said, steady as steel, "I set the trap." Preparation wasn't just about evidence. It was about making sure no one could sweep it under the rug. The next morning, I started with the neighbors. I went door to door, not as a fire investigator, not as a man with files and photos, but as Daniel Ruiz, the neighbor who'd lived here 10 years, who'd fixed leaking sprinklers and carried groceries for the widows on the block. Mr. Alvarez was the first to answer. He looked tired, wary. "If this is about Linda," "It is," I said plainly. "But this time, I've got proof. Not just stories, not just finds. Proof of what she did to Elena's car." His eyes narrowed. "Proof?" I showed him the photos, burn patterns, residue trails. I didn't overwhelm him with jargon. I just let the images speak. His frown deepened as he scanned them. When I tucked the maintenance log into his hands, his shoulders sagged. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew she was behind it." One by one, I repeated the process. Some slammed doors, some muttered about not wanting trouble, but more than a few leaned closer, their fear cracking just enough to let anger through. They'd been silent too long. The fire had woken something in them. By the end of the afternoon, I had half a dozen quiet allies. Not warriors, not whistleblowers, just people ready to stand in the crowd when the time came. And sometimes, that was enough. Back at home, Elena spread the folders across the dining table. She'd turned into my second set of hands, labeling files, arranging photos by angle. "If you're really going to do this," she said, "we can't leave anything loose." She'll try to twist it. She was right. Linda's power came from control, controlling fear, controlling the narrative. To beat her, I needed to strip control away. I called Sam again, running through every weakness Linda's lawyer might exploit. He drilled me like I was back in the academy. "Chain of custody?" he asked. "Logged and sealed. Witness reliability?" She's scared, but the log backs her story. "Alternate ignition sources?" Ruled out. Electrical systems intact. Each answer tightened the net. Each correction sharpened the blade. By the time I hung up, the case wasn't just strong, it was airtight. Night fell, but the work didn't stop. Elena typed statements while I pinned photographs to the corkboard in my office. Burn trails, residue samples, Mara's whispered words. All of it formed a story too loud to ignore, and still, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Every time I stepped outside, I caught curtains shifting in Linda's windows. Her presence hung over the street like smoke, thick and suffocating. She knew I was moving. She just didn't know how close I was. That night, as I locked the office door, Elena stopped me in the hall. "Danny," she said softly, "what if it doesn't work? What if she twists it back on you?" I looked at her, at the fear in her eyes that mirrored the flames we'd both stood in front of. "Then she'll learn the hard way that fire leaves fingerprints. And I know how to read every single one." She didn't argue. She just nodded, her chin trembling but her resolve holding. I stepped out onto the porch, folders under my arm, and looked at the Mustang in the driveway. The chrome caught the moonlight, reflecting it back like a shield. It wasn't just a car, it was a promise, my father's promise, and Linda had come too close to breaking it. The evidence was ready. The neighbors were watching. Mara's confession was tucked safe in my pocket. All that was left was to pull the spark that would set everything in motion. The night before the board meeting, I laid everything out one last time. The dining table was buried in folders, photos, and vials, each piece arranged like evidence in a courtroom. Elena sat across from me, arms folded, eyes heavy with worry. She hadn't slept properly since the fire, but tonight she was sharper than ever, scanning each file as if she were the one building the case. "You've checked this 100 times, she said. "And I'll check it 100 more, I replied, sliding a photo into the stack. "Linda's strength isn't her rules, it's her ability to twist them. I can't give her an inch. I clipped the maintenance log to the residue analysis, pairing Mara's hidden confession with Sam's confirmation. Together, they told a story no gavel could silence. Accelerant poured, equipment signed out, orders given, a crime written in fire. Elena exhaled slowly. "You're really going to present this in front of everyone?" "Yes," I said. "In front of the board, the neighbors, the sheriff, if I can get him there." She built her power on fear. It ends when that fear cracks. I felt the weight of the Mustang keys in my pocket. My father's voice echoed in memory. "Stand your ground, Danny. Don't let them take what's yours." The next morning, I drove to the sheriff's office. The receptionist gave me a once-over, unimpressed by my folders and bags. But I asked for Collins anyway. He wasn't just the sheriff. He was Elena's father. And whether he knew it yet or not, he was already part of this fight. When he finally stepped out, tall and sharp-eyed, I set the evidence on his desk. "I'm not here for sympathy," I told him. "I'm here to show you the truth." He leafed through the photos, his face giving nothing away. "You're certain?" he asked finally. "As certain as I've ever been," I said. This wasn't random. It was targeted, and it came from within her property line. Collins tapped the vial of residue. "I'll be at the meeting tomorrow. If what you're saying holds up in front of everyone, I'll handle the rest." Relief surged through me, steadying the weight on my chest. His presence alone would make the walls tremble. That evening, Elena helped me pack the folders into a weathered leather briefcase I hadn't used in years. My hands shook, not with fear, but with the clarity of what was about to happen. Neighbors passed by our porch as the sun dipped low, offering nods, murmurs of support, eyes filled with a hope they hadn't dared show before. The whispers had spread. People knew something was coming. Inside, I rehearsed what I'd say. Not speeches, not dramatics, just the facts. Fire doesn't need embellishment. It speaks in scars and smoke. I would let the evidence speak the same way. Elena stopped me as I closed the case. What if she explodes in front of everyone? Then they'll see her for what she is, I said. We stepped outside together. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of cut grass and roses from Linda's yard. The Mustang gleamed in the driveway, reflecting the last orange streaks of sunset. I placed my hand on the hood, grounding myself in its steel. "This is it," I whispered. "The last night she holds power." Elena slipped her hand into mine, her grip strong despite her fear. "Then make sure you finish it." I looked down the street toward the clubhouse, where tomorrow the walls would echo with truth, louder than any threat Linda could hurl. The evidence was ready. The sheriff was coming. The neighbors were restless. And I was no longer just a man fighting for my sister's car. I was fighting for every resident who had been silenced, fined, or threatened into submission. Tomorrow, the fire would turn. The clubhouse was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it. Folding chairs filled every corner, neighbors standing along the walls, whispers bouncing through the hall like nervous static. For once, people weren't just here for coffee and perfunctory votes. They were here because something had cracked open, and no one wanted to miss what spilled out. At the front of the room, the board sat stiffly behind a long table, and in the center, crimson blazer, sharp as ever, sat Linda Markham. She tapped her pen against a stack of notices, chin high, eyes daring anyone to challenge her authority. I set my briefcase on the table, the sound snapping the murmurs into silence. Elena sat just behind me, her presence steady, her father, the sheriff, standing near the back wall with arms crossed, a quiet storm waiting to break. Linda's lips curved into a thin smile. "Mr. Ruiz, I trust you've come prepared to address your repeated violations?" I met her smile with none of my own. "I've come prepared, yes, but not to discuss parking passes." I opened the case, spreading photos across the table so the nearest neighbors could see. Burn trails, residue close-ups, the maintenance log stamped with initials. Gasps rippled through the front rows. "This," I said, my voice carrying across the room, "is what was left after my sister's car burned. The official report called it electrical, but the burn pattern tells a different story." I tapped the photo where the V shape pointed to the rear wheel well. "This fire started outside, with accelerant poured along the curb. Not an accident. Arson." Linda's pen froze mid-tap. "That's a serious accusation," she said tightly. I lifted the vial, holding it to the light. "Residue confirmed by a county fire marshal. Gasoline. Days later, it still clings to the soil." I set it down beside the log. "And this? Equipment signed out by your maintenance man the very night of the fire, fuel container included." The room stirred, voices rising, neighbors craning to see. Mara sat at the edge of the board, her hands folded too tightly, face pale. Her eyes flicked to me, then away, as though summoning courage from the floor. I pressed forward. "This isn't negligence. This isn't enforcement. This is criminal." A deliberate act to intimidate and control Linda stood abruptly, her chair scraping. "Outrageous. Lies. You can't come in here." "Enough!" The sheriff's voice cut through the room like a gavel. Collins stepped forward, pulling his badge into the light. "Sit down, Linda." The shockwave silenced even the whispers. For the first time, Linda faltered, her eyes darting to the badge, then to Elena, whose steady gaze told her the truth she'd missed. She hadn't just picked on a neighbor. She'd gone after the sheriff's daughter. Mara's voice finally cracked the air, shaking but clear. "He's telling the truth." I heard her. She told Mark the car had to go, that it should never come back. Gasps erupted. Head swiveled toward Linda. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. For once, words failed her. The sheriff moved to the front, picking up the log and residue vial, examining them carefully. Then he turned to the room. "This isn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. This is evidence of arson, and as of this moment, it's a criminal investigation." The crowd erupted, some in relief, some in outrage, all in disbelief that the fortress of fear had cracked. Neighbors who'd stayed silent for years suddenly spoke at once, their voices rising with anger about fines, threats, intimidation. It was like a dam had burst, and the flood was unstoppable. Linda tried to speak over the noise, shouting about bylaws and authority, but her voice was swallowed by the tide. The mask she'd worn for years had slipped, and everyone could see the desperation beneath it. I gathered the photos slowly, methodically, my hands steady. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight pressing down. I felt it lifting. The fire had spoken, and this time, the whole community had heard. The clubhouse emptied slowly, like smoke clearing after a blaze. Neighbors lingered in clusters outside, their voices louder, freer than I'd ever heard them. For years, they'd whispered in fear. Tonight, they shouted in the open. Inside, Sheriff Collins stood at the front table, methodically collecting the evidence I'd laid out. The vial, the photos, the maintenance log, all of it sealed into official bags. His deputies moved quietly, but the weight of their presence filled the room. Linda sat rigid in her chair, hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched. Gone was the polished confidence, the rehearsed smile. What sat there now was something raw, the cornered look of someone who finally realized her fire couldn't burn forever. "Linda Markham," the sheriff said, his voice steady as iron, "you're under investigation for arson and conspiracy. Until this case is resolved, you're suspended from all HOA duties, effective immediately." The crack of authority landed harder than any gavel. Neighbors erupted, some clapping, some gasping, some simply stunned into silence. For the first time, her power fractured in plain sight. Linda rose to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Her gaze darted to Mara, who sat at the edge of the table, head bowed but unbroken. Mara had chosen her side, and the silence between them was louder than any argument. As deputies guided Linda out, I caught her eye one last time. No smug smile, no polished threat, just the brittle anger of a woman watching her empire collapse. When the door closed behind her, the room seemed to exhale. Neighbors turned to me, one after another, offering nods, handshakes, even hushed thank yous. Mr. Alvarez pressed my hand with both of his. "We've been waiting for this day," he said. His voice cracked, but his eyes burned with relief. I looked at Elena, standing steady in the crowd. She met my gaze, and for the first time since the fire, her shoulders eased. The scar on the pavement outside would never disappear, but tonight something heavier had lifted from her. Later, on the walk back home, the night air felt different, lighter. The street lamps cast long shadows, but they no longer seemed like places for threats to hide. Neighbors stood on porches talking freely, voices rising instead of dropping to whispers when I passed. At the driveway, the Mustang gleamed under the porch light. I laid a hand on its hood, the cool metal grounding me. My father's words echoed again. "This car will outlast me. It'll remind you where you come from." Tonight, it had reminded me of more. It had reminded the entire neighborhood that legacies can't be burned out, not by fines, not by fear, not even by fire. Elena joined me, leaning against the fender. She didn't speak at first, just breathed in the night air. Then she said softly, "Do you think it's really over?" I thought about the evidence sealed in the sheriff's office, about Mara's trembling voice breaking the silence, about the neighbors who had finally found theirs. "It's over for her," I said, "and for us, it's just beginning. This place gets to be a community again, not her kingdom." She smiled faintly, the first real smile I'd seen since the flames. "Dad said you fought like hell in there." I chuckled under my breath. I didn't fight alone. The Mustang's chrome caught the moonlight, casting a sharp gleam across the driveway. I saw my reflection there, tired, scarred, but standing, that was enough. I looked down the street where the clubhouse lights still glowed faintly. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, headlines, maybe even backlash. But tonight, there was peace. I turned to Elena. "We kept our promise. Dad's legacy, your future, safe. That's all that matters." She nodded, leaning her head lightly against my shoulder. And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. If you've ever stood up to someone who thought they could burn your life down and walk away untouched, tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story.